Hello, I am Henrique Olifiers. I have been a game developer who is making games for around 35 years now. I started my journey as a designer and developer when I was around 13 years old. I was coding on an 8-bit machine, the ZX Spectrum computer, and I was selling my games in cassette tapes to my friends in school. And later I became a developer for the Amiga computer. I was part of the demo scene in that platform and pushing the limits of the hardware of that machine, which was very fun to do back in the 90s as well. Today, I have founded my own studio, and I am the CEO there, the Bossa Games. I'm also the chairman of TinyBuild, which I'm sure you all know very well. And in my spare time, I build retro computers, like the ZX Spectrum Next, which is the evolution of the original. I take it to Kickstarter, raised a few million, and created like 10 to 20,000 of these machines and distributed it around the world for a new generation of game developers to try out. So this is my daily job, Bossa, TinyBuild, and when I have some time left, I rebuild machines, right? In terms of games, some of the games you probably heard of, I worked in things like RuneScape or FIFA, but also on my own games at Bossa, such as Surgeon Simulator, I Am Bread, I Am Fish, and now Lost Skies. By the way, Lost Skies have just got a demo live on Steam Next Fest. So if you're interested to finding out what kind of games we are working on, what kind of things we do, there is no better way than to play that game for free and try out. It's a big co-op PvE survival game, multiplayer, where all the content in the game was made by the players even before the game has been launched. So it's a very unique thing. Anyway, throughout my career, which is very long now, unfortunately, I'm getting gray, I'm totally gray, I have created around 40 games, right? And some of them went to be very successful and sell millions of copies worldwide across every platform under the sun, from PC to consoles to VR and mobile. So it's fair to say that I achieved my childhood dream of becoming a game developer and somehow successful at it, so I'm happy in that context. Now, the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today will be a fairly sensitive and difficult topic to talk about. It is hard because it's involved change, and every time we are faced with change, we struggle, we try to find the way forward, and it's never an easy thing to do. But change in our industry right now is happening, and happening very fast, whether we like it or not, and whether we are prepared for it or not. It's profound change, change that we have to live to adapt ourselves to it, or we will have trouble surviving it. I want you also to know that the experience I'm going to relate today and the things I'm going to talk about, they have affected me in my studio as well. I have experienced the pain that I'm going to walk you through today as well. I'm going to share that we had to make redundancies, we have to let people go that I have worked with for almost a decade. And this is all very hard because it's not just employees, it's friends, colleagues, peers, right? So when I say that this is hard, I mean it, because I'm going through it myself. And I will try my best to walk you through it so you have a chance to not having to go through it yourself. Right? The reasons why this is happening, we will discuss. There are a lot. And I also believe that they, in the end, is the right thing to do, but nothing eases the pain of losing dear colleagues and friends that you get to call them friends. Right? I'm sure you all heard about the tough times that the industry is going through, the layoffs and the closure of industry and so on. And I'm sure you also heard that the strategy for the past 2 years and this year is for you to survive, right? Stay down, keep together, survive, because soon things are going to be better. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. We will not go back to the games industry that we had in 2021, where you could get a pitch doc and get a game funded, etc. That is the past. The changes and the pain that we are going through today are here to stay unless we adapt to what's to come. So I will start the whole thing with a very bold statement. Okay? the industry of the 2 years in the future will be nothing like the industry of 2 years ago. This difficulty, these troubles that we are going through as colleagues, as peers, as an industry, is not a phase that we will go through, and then we go back to the old ways. This is not going to happen. You cannot wait for things to go back, right? And this is not about survival. This is about reinvention. We will have to reinvent ourselves as developers, as publishers, as creators, as gamers, if we need to do this to survive, hopefully thrive in this new landscape that is upon us, that will finally present itself in the coming months and years. So let me give you a bit of history that led us to where we are. Let's take a quick step back and look at how the game industry of a couple of years ago used to work in general lines, right? The game developer will come up with an idea, design for the game, the production plans, the pitch, and of course the team who will make that idea, that concept into a game, right? The publisher would hold the power in that dynamic as a part of that production. Above all, the publisher will come up with funding. They will make it so that your team gets paid and the game gets made and gets out there, right? But they will also take care of the distribution. They would, in the old days, they would replicate the DVDs and the Blu-rays. They would negotiate shelf space with a store that will carry those things. They would deal with the digital platforms to ensure that your game will be seen there and will be on the carousel and will be on the front page and whatnot, right? They will secure exposure for the game that you are building together. They will bring to the table services like translation and localization. They will define in which territories the game will be launched, in which order. They will even set the regional prices for the game in these territories, right? They would hire QA, they will hire testing, they would do support, they would do certification, they would submit the game to the platforms because they knew the TRCs better than anyone else. And they will also negotiate deals with the like of PlayStation Plus, Game Pass, and so on, right? Lastly, they will do all the PR. They will reach out to the press, they will take you to events on their booths, they will handle even social media, they will hire influencers to talk about your game, and the game will be seen by the players through the actions of the publisher. So if you had a good game, and you had a good publisher, in the end, likelihood is you have a success. Right now, we are in a bit of a strange time. We all know that. Things are changing, and changing very fast. There's a lot of fear, there's some bit of anger, there's a lot of frustration. So let's understand what changed there to cause all of this. In this world, the developer still comes with the idea and the team. Today, you create a game concept, you create the idea, and you have the team, right? That hasn't changed at all. It's still the same. The publisher, though, that's completely changed. And by changing, I mean upside down. It's completely different. They still fund the game. That's their main responsibility. But when it comes to distribution, they find it very hard to talk to the digital platforms. Why? Because the digital platforms are all algorithmical now. Of course, they can put something on the main carousel by hand, but they only do that when you have a certain number of wish lists, etc. So it's an algorithm on itself. The publisher has a lot of trouble getting your game seen because Steam doesn't take money from anyone. They do what they have to do. That's good, but also limits what the publisher can do, right? There is no way to trace marketing into Steam. There's no way to trace marketing into Xbox. There's no way to trace marketing to PlayStation. So if the publisher does a marketing activity around that, he doesn't know if that is converting or not. So he doesn't have that lever to pull anymore, right? It's all kind of a black box for the publisher. Physical media is gone. It's very small on consoles. On PC, it doesn't exist anymore. Retailers are gone, right? GameStop is struggling. Game is struggling, so you cannot walk on a store and find them anymore in any meaningful way. So that means that the publishers, essentially, they no longer control distribution. They have nothing to do in terms of distribution. In terms of services, though, there are a couple of things that are happening. The first one is that AI is coming very fast for localization. The regional prices that the publisher in the past helped you with are all set by the platform. You go there, put the price that you want in dollars, and it does for every single territory that you want. You don't need a publisher to do that anymore. Right? Testing agencies and QA. A lot of QA is now being done inside the studio itself. You develop the game, you test it yourself, and then in the end, you hire an agency to do the QA and testing for you. It's in compliance with TRCs and everything. That's done by an agency that you hire. The publisher might pay the bill, doesn't matter. It's not the publisher itself doing it anymore. Okay? And even there, AI is already intruding. We have AI for translation, does a very good job. We have AI for testing some aspects of the game, it also starting to do a good job. So the publisher are not even in control of TRCs anymore. You are doing that. If there is something that you need to find about how to submit your game to TRC, it's all available online. If you want, even take a screenshot of your game and submit it to, say, Claude or ChatGPT, it will look at it and say, oh, this is too small. This button doesn't pass the TRCs for PlayStation. Even that, AI already can help you with. So that's all of the hands of publishers as well. They don't have control over that anymore. And then on marketing, first PR. There are great PR agencies out there that can do direct and very cheap work with the studios themselves to promote the studio and the game. Not just the game, like the publisher would do in the past. Right? And when you work directly with a PR agency, they can talk about the game much better than they could when the publisher was in the middle. So PR is also external now. In terms of traditional media, like magazines, websites, portals, etc., it's like these people are they're understaffed, they are overworked, their business model doesn't work anymore. And if you look at the data, less than 5% of the players find out about new games they're going to play through websites and through magazines. 5% today. 95% of them are fighting about games elsewhere. So again, this is gone. Lastly, influencers. Influencers are king. They are the ones making games seen and making games known. They are the ones moving and shaking the industry. But when the publisher pays the influencer to cover a game, the influencer has to disclose that in their stream. They have to tell the players this is a sponsored stream. Right? And when they do that, immediately the conversion rate between viewers and buying the game goes down. Because the viewers no longer think that the influencer is covering because the influencer likes the game. The influencer is covering because the influencer has been paid to cover the game. Right? So in order for influencers to work well, the developer has to work directly with them. And they have to play the game because they like the game, not because they're being paid to do so. Otherwise, the conversion rate is too low to even make sense. So, they are not in control of marketing as well. This is what is causing the pain in the industry right now. This is what is driving all the chaos and the difficulties that we are experiencing. Has nothing to do with the pandemic, has nothing to do with the lack of investment in games. All of this stuff that you are reading or hearing about, that is not what is causing the problem. What is causing the problem is a seismic shift of how the people who finance games in our industry are going through. And they are still figuring out what is it that they're going to do about all of this. And because of that, they are not investing the same way that they were investing 2 years ago. Well, where does this lead us? With this new setup and this new arrangement, what is happening right here under our feet? What are the publishers doing about this, and how can we position ourselves to do something about it with our studios, right? The new publisher is trending towards a model where it is the source of funding, and the funding only. There are already publishers who operate like this, like Kepler, for instance. But they aren't that many yet. A lot of them are still transitioning and trying to figure out what is it they're going to do. But a lot of them are already transitioning. They're scaling back their operations, they're scaling back their capabilities, and they're focusing only on which games they're going to fund, rather than which games they're going to help build with the developer. There's a very big distinction there between funding a game and helping build a game from day one with the developer. This is the transition that is happening, right? In this scenario, this is the role of the developer in all of this. They still come up with the idea, they still come up with the team, But they will also translate and localize the game themselves with the help of AI or friends or perhaps a small localization company to do a final pass in it. Although even that is a little bit challenging because AI is getting super good, very good at localizing. Today is already very acceptable and is not going to get worse. It will only get better. Devs will do critical QA internally. I code it, I test it myself, it's working, right? And instead of having QA throughout the process, QA will shift more towards the end around alpha and beta, where you can hire an agency to verify the final builds of the game, give you final feedback, help you through the TRCs and submission processes. But again, as an agency that the developer has a direct relationship with, right? Game pages and things like that, the developer is also making all the assets. They're making everything that goes into the platform. They are talking to their own PR agency that's talking about the developer and the game itself in a holistic way. And they're starting to build relationship with the influencers, because that's the way you should advertise your game. Since the beginning, you start talking about it with influencers, and hopefully when the game is ready to launch, the influencer knows about it and covers it, right? So it's all the developer now. The developer holds most of the cards that can make a game a success. The publisher, who used to pull all these levers, don't have much to do now. So if all goes well in this dynamic, you get a successful game in the end. But there's no denying that the power is shifted, which means that the publisher is far more hesitant and far more kind of nervous about all of this, because they don't have the same level of control that they used to have before. So let's look at how the publisher of tomorrow is going to likely be in this scenario, right? So here's the publisher. The publisher has all the monies, and they have zero control over what happens with your game. Sure, they will still have milestones to approve. They will give feedback on your milestone. They will play your game and say, oh, I don't like this. Have you thought of that? This doesn't resonate. What do you think of this? All of that, right? But success is engineered now by the developer, no longer by the publisher. And this will impact how the publishers are built, what they're made of, what people work inside the publisher, and their very teams. First, they will be made of smaller teams. The publisher will become smaller. They no longer need marketing teams. They don't need anyone to buy advertisement. Where are they going to buy that advertisement? Not in magazines, not in banners on websites. Well, where's the marketing team for the publisher goes? Right? They don't need PR experts anymore, because you're dealing with a PR agency yourself for your studio and for your game. They won't need a QA coordinator because you're doing QA directly with yourself. They won't need a localization producer anymore because localization is happening with AI, a small agency, and it's all getting smaller. Second, they will spread their bets. They will get the pot of money they have, and because they're feeling like they're losing control over which games get successful, they will make more but smaller bets. So they got more games, but much smaller than they had before. So they will spread this risk across multiple titles. If one of them hits, it's all good. The more of them hits, the better. So it's more bets. They will become, of course, more risk-averse, meaning that they want games that are similar to things that they have seen before or things that are working in the market. Innovation will be much harder to sell to most publishers, not all. There will always be publishers who are at the forefront and they will take different risks, etc. They will understand what you're trying to do. But in general, they will want more certainty that you're working on something that is more likely to work. They will want to see a lot of traction. They will not sign a game that is on a deck. They will ask you how many wish lists this game already has, which means even before talking to the publisher, you already have a page on Steam for your game, right? How many followers? How many views on the trailer that you put out? How many data points you have to give them comfort that there is a success story already in the making that they can amplify rather than build with you from zero, which is what they used to do. This is very different. And because of their afraid of taking risks, they will no longer sign game concepts. Actually, they're not even signing prototypes. They are starting to ask the developers for vertical slices, which is far into development. For people like us to get to vertical slices takes a long time. So the discussions with the publishers that start very early as you are developing the game up to the point you get to the vertical slice will become super protracted, will become super slow. It will take a lot more time for the publisher to actually sign the deal because it will get to a lot more time for you to create the vertical slices that will lead them to sign the publishing deal with you, right? And lastly, they will be very fearful of what's ahead, at least for now. There will be some time until they settle and start to feel comfortable with how the things are working. Because they're more fearful, they will be more on edge, they will be more watchful, they will start to second-guess their own decisions. So it will be harder to be open to share problems in production with the publishers. You will have to be more careful with what you expose and how you expose it because they can overreact to that kind of situation. This all sounds quite miserable and quite difficult, so how on earth we will get to release a game that is successful, right? Now we're getting to get interesting. How can you build the game studio of tomorrow? And by tomorrow, I don't mean next year, I mean tomorrow. Let's address the new publisher features here and try to put the new context of the publishers into how you can build a studio to work with that landscape. Let's start with smaller teams. They will have smaller teams beyond the capabilities for funding. So the new studio, yours, the developer, will need a marketing head. You will need someone who will deal with the influencers, the PR agencies, who will deal with the influencers. They will do all the marketing legwork. That's inside the studio. And ideally, that's a co-founder, because it's someone who will be so critical to the success of your game that you have to trust that person entirely. Marketing now is as important for you as a developer, not for the project, but for you, as it is art, as it is engineering, as it is anything else that you do. So if you have an engineer that you trust, you need to have a marketeer that you trust just as much. You need to be taking care of BizDev. If you have everything under your radar, you should be talking to the platforms yourself. So you will be doing Game Pass deals. You will be doing PlayStation deals. You will need someone, a business development guy, that will do this all for you. Maybe he's hired and do it for several studios, because if you are small. But if you are big enough, you will need someone internally doing all this. You cannot rely on platforms doing these deals for you anymore. Sorry, publishers. Right? And this makes me as uncomfortable as anyone in this room, but AI is here to stay. Okay? It doesn't matter if there is something today that it doesn't do very well, like Copilot is terrible at giving you good code advice, I get that. But the reality is that AI will only become better. It will become cheaper, it will become quicker. There's no way around that thing, right? It will not be meant to replace people, I don't believe so. But I believe that is a fundamental tool that we all will have to use more and more. And quite frankly, if you're not using AI in one aspect of your game production today, you're already behind on the curve. Maybe you're using it to create internal pitch documents. Doesn't matter. Maybe you're using it just to write some blurb that you put on social. It doesn't matter why or what you're using it for, but you would expect it to be using it by now. A lot of people are. And if you don't, they will take the edge over you, and you will not be able to catch up with them anymore. The sooner you start embracing AI as a tool, not as a replacement, the sooner you will start to perform to the level that you will have in the future. Lastly, to do everything that I spoke about, doing QA with an agency, doing certification, doing localization, etc., some of your senior team members will have to be super empowered to do that. You have to trust them, you have to train them, and you have to give them responsibilities that they didn't have before. They had a publisher to do that. Now they will have to do it themselves. The obvious one is that if I am a coder, I will have to test my own code to some degree. I cannot just push it to the build expecting that code has bugs or knowing that the code has bugs so I can wait for a Jira ticket to tell me that, oh, you need to fix this. No, you have to test your code yourself because that's the only way you get efficient sufficiently to be able to compete in this new world. Smaller budgets, what does that mean to the developer? Well, it means smaller teams, right? If you cannot get a game signed today for more than $1 million, it is an aberration, it's out of the curve. All the publishers you will talk to that you are aware of, they will be signing games that are less than $1 million. Which impact does this have on the size of your team? Which impact on what kinds of games you can make? And more importantly, how long does it take for that game to be made? Because with a budget like this, with a team of 10 people, we're talking, what, a year? Maybe a year and a half from develop for a concept to launch. So you have to be the faster, more efficient than you have ever been. This will be hard. And take advantage of tools like AI to help you with that. The second, and this is super controversial, there is a lot of stuff that we have on our studio that doesn't work on the game itself. Some studios, like 3 or 4 people, it's fine. It's just you and the developers. But when you go to 20 people, to 30 people, you have a lot there. You will have a finance person. You will have an HR person. You will have middle producers, like senior producers, junior producers. You will have all sorts of people who help that studio live and breathe and operate well. That is a cost. That is a cost that eats into the $1 million budget that you have to produce a game. You have to think about those costs very well, and you have to judge and make very harsh decisions to perhaps shift some of those costs to external agencies. Maybe you don't need an accountant and a finance person inside the studio anymore. You hire an external accountant. Maybe your HR person is now working on 3 or 4 studios. You split them with other colleagues of studios of yours. It doesn't matter. You have to break down the overhead. You have to bring down the overheads. Because if you don't, you will make less of a game because of the overheads. Time is restricted, money is restricted, overheads are a big weight holding you down as you make your game. Right? And the last aspect is another one that is gonna make some trouble for me, but I'm gonna talk about this anyway, right? You have to go open source and you have to go free software as an alternative to what you use today. For every paid tool that is out there, there is a good free open source alternative that you don't have to pay for it. If you're using Maya, if you're using 3D Max, go Blender. If you're using Unity and paying a subscription for that, considering going to the model of Unreal, which is revenue share. And if you fail or if you have struggled, don't have anything to pay, or something like Godot or something like that, you have to consider this. Even things like Slack. You use Slack, migrate to Mattermost. It's exactly like Slack, but it's free. You use Windows, consider Linux. Why is this? You can't be paying for external services like this because the only way they will go up. With all these studio closures and all these layoffs that we are seeing right now, what will happen to these people providing you the tools? Their revenue will go down. How they're going to make up for the revenue that they are losing? They're going to increase the cost. What we saw happening with Unity a few months back last year, where it tried to put runtime fees into Unity, thankfully they went back to that and the board was fired and they reverted course, right? That's just an indication of things to come. More like that will happen. There are other middleware providers, there are other tool providers out there who serve us as a games industry who are already cranking up the prices mid-development. So imagine this, you made the budget for $1 million, start working on a game, you have all the prices, all the costs are organized there. And then they knock on your door and say, you know that tool that you use that is instrumental for your game? Yeah, we're going to raise the price for that for 10 times. It happened, already happened. There is middleware companies who raised the price 10 times last year. You cannot be caught like this. This will end you. So every single thing that you can move away from commercial and go to free and open source, things that you can control, things that you know is going to be there, even if the company who makes them goes up in flames, that is your key for your success. Risk aversion and data-driven. Thankfully, we can group these two together and find the simple solutions for them, right? Because they are very characteristically and they're mitigated by the same thing. But before I go into exactly what we should do to tackle those two, let me make a quick pause here. I want to talk to you about the game concept, right? How appealing the game concept that you're working on is for the players, even before they know what the game is like. So I'll give you a quick example, topical now. This is Steam Next Fest today. Okay? These are the top 4 demos on Steam Next Fest. Look at the top one. There's almost 200 people playing that game at this very moment, right? So players are super interested in this game. They want this game, okay? It's a game about mechas. It has a lot of Gundam going on for it. It's visually stunning, etc. But If you go to the page of the game, it's 35% review score, right? 35%. What does this tell you? This tells me there is a massive audience out there, a huge number of players that are killing for a Gundam-esque multiplayer game, right? But this game probably doesn't satisfy what they want, or they wouldn't have that score, right? They are coming to this game expecting something different. Now, this for me is a kind of validation. I know that there is a demand in the market for a mecha game. And there is an opportunity to making a mecha game, because this doesn't look like you're going to satisfy that. So if I was starting a game today with my team and thinking about what kind of game we're going to make, I will be playing Zone of the Enders like there is no tomorrow, because this is a gap, right? There are tons of ways for you to validate the game concept before you even write your first line of code. And there is an example here in Poland, a company called Playway, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, right? A few years ago, Playway was putting a lot of trailers of games that did not exist out there. And they would see which trailers people would actually watch and be excited about, and those were the games that they started making after the trailers existed. That's a way to validate a concept before you even write your first line of code. I'm not saying that that is the best way or the way that you should use. You have to find your own way to validate your game concept, but you have to validate your game concept before you even write the first line of code, because that will mitigate the risk averse of the developer, of the publisher. They look at something that is already validated and say, okay, there's half of the risk here than it was on something that is not validated. And quite frankly, you don't want to find out halfway through development, after you have sunk months into development, that the concept is not resonating with your players. This is a good idea to do, regardless of if the publisher thinks it's a good idea or not. Let's look at something else. You know all these games, right? Vampire Survivors, Valheim, BattleBit, and so on. These are all kind of massive overnight successes over Steam. They came out of nowhere, except they did not come out of nowhere, okay? All these games, all of them, they were on itch.io way before they hit Steam. By the time they hit Steam, they were fully validated. The teams will already know that they were working on a successful game, because they have people play their games for years before these games move it to Steam. They were already successes on itch.io, small, but successes. So when they took it to Steam, they just amplified that success into the millions. And next thing you know, oh, these games came out of nowhere. I never heard about these games, but they are super big. They're selling millions, right? So the idea of you making a game that nobody knows about, or you haven't tested, or you haven't built a community around it until it's ready to launch, is absolutely crazy in this new world. You have to develop your game with your audience as soon as you validate the concept. You validate the concept, people are excited about it, you start to code that game, the prototype that you're going to take to publishers, etc., you're already sharing it with your community. You're building it with your community. You're getting wish lists for that game. You're converting them into some sort of retention, where you can then, when the game is ready, push that all at once on day one when you release on Steam, because then that triggers the algorithms of Steam and say, where the hell all these people come from buying this game? Oh my God, it's a great game. Homepage, next is history. This happened to every one of these single games, and I can list dozens of games that did the same thing, and they are super successful for having done that. That's a story that not very many people are talking about. You think of Steam as the only platform. You think of early access as the way to develop your games with your players. Early access is not that anymore. The players in early access, they want a game which is fully formed. So where are you going to develop your game? From prototype, from gray boxes, etc. itch.io is super welcoming to that. There are other platforms as well. It doesn't have to be itch.io, but the concept is the same. The mindset is the same. Slower to sign. This one is a problem that I haven't completely figured out, but I have one solution that might be helpful for you, but not for everybody. When you have game concepts that have been validated, and you're ready to start coding them into prototypes, try to do it more than once. Do 2, maybe 3 game ideas that you validate, You concept it. And when the validation comes back to you, you start working on the one that has been the best validated of the 2 or 3. But you are pitching all 3 to different publishers. Okay? There are publishers now who are starting to kind of get super laser focused on a particular genre. For instance, Paradox does strategy games, or Hooded Horse does strategy games. Why are they doing that? Because they can cross-promote the players from one title into another. When they churn from title A, it's very easy for them to go into the ecosystem and move them to title B. Right? So you can have different games being pitched by different publishers. Just don't pitch 2 games to one publisher. Never do that. Right? That is a terrible idea. But you can have 2 or 3 ideas being pitched to different publishers. And when you manage to sign one, someone likes that idea, and you guys are working on it, and the game is evolving, etc., don't stop the other ideas. Keep coming back to them. Keep evolving them. Because by the time this game is launched, you will have something which is far more mature and down the line, ready to go. You will have all the time in the world to negotiate deals. You will have all the time in the world to talk about this game with other publishers, etc. The one thing you don't want is to launch a game and then think about what you're going to do next. Because the time between you launching that game and the time that game being signed, because it's much slower, may actually kill your studio. So you got to push this time here and always have things staggered. Now, fearful of the future, I'm sorry I don't have a solution for this one. I will leave it to time, which is the one thing that sorts all troubles in the world. What I think is going to happen is that the publishers, when they see things moving in a different direction and things happening in a different way, they start to settle down, and the fear with time will fade. I don't think there's much we can do about that. So I have put you through a lot. Sorry for that. Let's brace here for a second. I will leave a lot of time for questions because I hope that every single one of you will bring a different perspective to this and test me on my assumptions. So, if you want to take pictures, this is the slide. Let's do a quick recap here. The new game developer, right? He has a much smaller team. That team is super well augmented by tools with AI that help them accelerate the most mundane tasks, the tasks that nobody likes doing. Let's have AI to do that, get out of the way, so we can concentrate on making great and creative games, okay? They're dealing with budgets that's sub 1 million, which means that either the team is very small or the time frame in which the game is developed is very short, likely both. They have very few overheads in-house. They shift as much overheads as they can outside, or they share those overheads with other studios. Be creative about this. If you need an HR person, but you're not big enough to have an HR person, why don't you have an HR person share between 2 or 3 studios in the same city that you operate? Be creative, be crazy. Throw away status quo and think of ways to optimize and eliminate as much of your overheads as possible. Don't forget, every dollar that goes into overhead is a dollar that is not going into production, which is what you want. You want to spend that dollar making the game. Okay? You'll be using open source. You'll be using free tools. You'll be using tools that cannot be taken away from you, or the price cannot be cranked up without you knowing that it's coming, without you having taken into account into the budget. That is super important. Some of the tools that we rely on today, some of the tools we use to build the games, they will caught us. They will surprise us in a bad way, and it can certainly derail your projects. Right? You have someone in the team taking care of all things marketing. They will be talking to the influencers on a one-to-one basis as soon as possible. They will be talking to your PR agency or PR person as soon as possible. They will be creating the story that you will use to relate to the players. Right? You will have a person taking care of BizDev, a relationship with the platforms. There might be you as a founder. There might be a BizDev that is shared with other studios and you hire them on a part-time. But you will need that because the publisher will not be doing that work for you anymore. And you don't want that. You want to build the relationships yourself. You want to know the people on the platforms. You want to be negotiating to them yourself. You don't want to hand that over to somebody else who doesn't have the resources to do that anyway. Right? AI is seen as a tool which is fundamental for you to use as any other tool you have used in the past, be it an engine, be it like an email, etc. It's just a tool. It's a scary tool because it does things you didn't know that it could, but it's a tool. Don't use it to replace people. Use it to support people. Get out of the dumb stuff out of the way. Get boring stuff, repetitive stuff. Give it to the AI. Get early stages of anything that will take you time. Give it to it, like first pass of balance sheets of items or description of items or concept art when you're pitching a document internally and so on. Shift. It's cheap, it's quick, and you only get better. Don't forget, AI will only get better. And you have empowered team members because they are doing a lot of stuff they're not used to do, that they were not hired to do. Your developers will be testing code. Your game designer will be helping you with the translation, right? Your lead developer will be taking care of TRCs and submissions and requirements for the platforms. You have to trust them. And you have to tell them that they have to do that. And you have to train them to do that. And you have to support them when they are doing that. Okay? So senior people in your team will be super important. And in the bottom here is what we just spoke about. You have to validate your game before you write the first line of code. Find a way to test your game idea with players before you invest any time on that idea. It can be game jam prototypes. It can be a pitch deck that you take to Kickstarter and crowdfund. It can be just a deck that you open up with player. You have to do that. The second is that the minute you start coding and put code and build something that you try, you share with players. Players will share that code with you. It's all gray boxes, it plays terrible, doesn't matter. Some players are up for that. If you want a good example of how this is done, check on YouTube the talks from Unknown Worlds, the makers of Subnautica at GDC. Okay? The first versions of Subnautica on early access, back in the day that early access was early access, they were all gray boxes. It was terrible. You had nothing to do. You just walk around and bump into invisible walls, and they built that game day by day with the community and became a big success. You can do that still today in the platforms like HIO and so on. That is the best way for you to make development and to create a community around your game as you do. So when you take it to the platform, to Steam, you push your game there with thousands of players who already love your game, and that will cause the algorithms to trigger, and you will get exposure algorithmically on Steam. Just like Vampire Survivors, Valheim, BattleBit, and all these games did, and did it very well. Okay? And lastly, if at all possible, do have a lot of projects in concept or prototype stage in parallel when you're building your main project. So by the time the main project is coming to an end, you already have discussions live that will tag along from that last project that you just released. Hopefully, that will help you to create the studio that will embrace these changes that we spoke about and all the trouble that is ahead of us. Thank you. So I have a lot of time for Q&A as I wanted, and I know that this is useful to illustrate the points where the questions will come from. Sorry? Yes, please do. I will. Yes, I can. I will put it somewhere and send the link.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
With this approach, I was wondering if the publisher is focusing mostly on funding only. What's the difference between publisher and like classical investor with this approach? Like VC, angel, and so on. So
that's a very good question. It's not unsurprising that some of the publishers today that focus only on funding, most of their compositions, the people sitting in there, are former investors. The distinction is very small. It's basically investors who understand games. They have been in the games industry, they have a know-how of the games industry, they have the ability to pick up something which they think is more likely to be successful. Almost like curators, if you wish. Right? Again, there is a massive difference between I'm building something from scratch with a developer, all the way through, every milestone, from concept, right? And making sure that we are doing that together and testing it together and building together, narrating about it together, pushing it out together. And there's a difference between, oh, this is a vertical slice, people already playing it, the wish list are already building, etc. So how is successful? How can I amplify this? which is what everybody's doing right now. And it's what they want to do going forward. They don't want to do this anymore. Okay? These people, the best capabilities they have is to raise money and to tell if something actually has momentum and it can be pushed forward. So, long story short, not much.
Hey, so a question about, you said smaller budgets and smaller, faster times to delivery, which kind of sounds like fragmentation. Are you worried that all the games that will be released will be like, a flash in the pan, very quick success, but also a very short one?
I'm not worried because I can worry with something that is inevitable. You already see a lot of games that are shorter in time, games that you play once and you never play again. This is not just a trend, this is happening right now. You have games which are idle games. Let me give a bit more of context. The generation we are serving today is very different from the generation we served 10 years ago. 20 years ago, you have a job 9 to 5. You get home at around 6, 7 p.m., you cook dinner, and then you have time to play a game. Okay? The new generation that is coming, sometimes they have 2 jobs. They are very time poor. They are resorting to entertainment, which is very short and very low energy demanding, because they are exhausted. This is part of what justified the existence of shorts, of TikToks, and so on. I can just relax and sit back. Games, by their very nature, they require energy, right? Just to go through a tutorial, I need undivided attention. I need to look at it and so on. This is becoming harder and harder. So the trend of shorter games and games that you can consume tangentially, or games that you can play a little bit and then put down, etc., is already here. The accessibility of the tools, like Unity, Unreal, Godot, and so on, are making games much easier to build. This is why we have a lot more games on Steam, on Xbox, on PlayStation. It's like the tools are more accessible. More people have access to it. You saw another industry where this has happened, music. Okay? You needed a studio 20 years ago to record a music. Today, you do it in your bedroom. Guess what? There are too many tracks coming into Spotify every day, hundreds of thousands, actually. So fragmentation will happen. It's inevitable. And it will only get accelerated with AI. So yes, games will become smaller, and they will become quicker to forget. It's just where it's trending. This is a generalization. There will always be space for Baldur's Gate. There will always be space for Skyrim, Fallout, right? But this will become less and less. And the general trend for indie games, especially, AA, I don't think is going to exist anymore. It's too much of a risk. And I can explain that why. But the smaller games, they will tend to become smaller to fit within these budgets. Maybe down the line, 2 or 3 years, these budgets start to increase again. But right now, it's very hard to predict that.
Thank you for brilliant PhD topic. And I want to ask what you can provide or advise indie developers who part-times and have one employment and another indie developers and evening.
So game developers who are working on a game part-time.
Yeah.
It is very hard because you are competing against game developers who are full-time. And with the tools available today, there are game developers who can live with no income. Right? Maybe they're being maintained by their parents. They're very young. Maybe they have some money stashed that they got there and they can live 2 or 3 years with that. We already exist in the world where there are huge multi-million selling games that were made by one player. RimWorld, Minecraft was made by one player. Right? Factorio was made by one player. Vampire Survivors was made by one player. One developer. Okay? So, this world already exists. If you only dedicated half time to your game, you have half of the chances that someone who is dedicated full time. But it's not impossible. You might be onto something which is amazing and is not complex. It's just amazing because it is. Vampire Survivors is a very simple game. Conceptually, technically, it's not very difficult to make, and yet it's an incredible game, right? So the advice would be, first do what I said, which is like test the concept very early on and make sure that the game you're working on, that you're dedicating half of your time to, is something that the players will like, will want. You have to do that, otherwise you might be unpleasantly surprised. And make sure there's something very simple that you can test and ship to market soon. You don't want to do that for 2 or 3 years to find out that it doesn't work. Okay? Those will be my 2 advices.
Thank you.
Thank you.